It's May 2019. Customs officials at Odessa Port open up a container from Colombia. The shipment lists construction materials, pallet after pallet of paint and varnish. Nothing out of the ordinary, or so it seemed. The truth was soon revealed. Cocaine, pure cocaine, was mixed in with the paint. The bust was just one of countless cases that highlight why, until February 2022 and the Russian invasion, many called Odessa the biggest smuggling hotspot in the Black Sea. This is a story about how Odessa has changed since the Russian invasion, and about how it remains an important city for many reasons, not least its role in international crime, and about what may lie ahead for a place once called the Pearl of the Black Sea. And it's a story all based on a new report conducted by the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. Odessa is an economic powerhouse, critical to Ukraine's trade with the world.
Odessa matters because it's Ukraine's gateway to the world. It's exports, imports, it's one of the largest cities in Ukraine, and it's our trade, basically.
Before the war, the city attracted millions of tourists from Ukraine and across the world, drawn to its famous beaches, colorful history, and party life. Odessa is home to the country's biggest oil and gas terminal, the OMTP oil district, and shipyards, as well as the Odesa Port plant, which is one of the largest producers of mineral fertilizers in Ukraine. The container port of Odessa is the largest in Ukraine, facilitating the flow of goods from across the world. It is through the ports in Odessa region that Ukraine exports the bulk of its most valuable agricultural commodity, grain.
Odessa provides 10% of the world's wheat. And Odessa also is the export point for sunflower oil, and Ukraine produces 50% of the world's sunflower oil.
But the city's vibrant economy and connection to global trade also make the city a magnet for organized crime.
The large amount of trade that we see in Odessa, it provides a lot of money, and money provides opportunity for criminal activity. Odessa is not just an export point, it's also an import point. And it was one of the channels for getting drugs and other illicit goods into Ukraine and the surrounding area, which is Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and Russia.
Starting in the 1990s, containers loaded with counterfeit goods from China and elsewhere began flowing through the port and onto the 7-kilometer market on the city outskirts. And millions of dollars of cocaine and heroin were smuggled in, mostly destined for Europe and Russia. The city also became a byword for sex trafficking, involving Ukrainians and trafficked foreign nationals. And corruption over construction and land was rampant. The so-called Odessa Mafia ran the city in the 1990s, bringing order to the under and upper worlds. Their criminal portfolio was diverse, including guns, drugs, and oil. At the local level, numerous ethnic criminal groups emerged, including Georgian, Azeri, Chechen, and even Chinese and Vietnamese. Each had their own sphere of influence, with control wielded by powerful criminal leaders.
So the Vori, or thieves-in-law, are a criminal subculture. These are criminal leaders who abide by the criminal laws, and that's why they're called thieves-in-law. So what they do is they set a set of rules, and you have to follow them, and if you don't, you get punished.
Local politics and organized crime merged more and more, with their sights set on both Kiev and Moscow to represent their interests.
Over the 2000s, these criminals continued with their illicit activities, but they wanted to legalize. They wanted to become legitimate businessmen and go into power, into politics. And that's what happened.
Then, all that changed. The container port shut down and was unable to function due to the Russian naval blockade. As a result, smuggling became all but impossible. The supply of cocaine, heroin, synthetic precursors, and counterfeit goods all dropped dramatically. Organized crime took a deep hit and has undergone seismic changes.
The outbreak of the war was an earthquake for the criminal system. Illegal actors either left, they went underground, or were told to stay quiet. So everything changed. The Russian-Ukrainian criminal organization basically was the biggest criminal ecosystem in Europe. And the war started a great divide between these two parts of the system, and they started to break away. The surprising thing is that the pro-Russian criminals did not go to Russia. They went to Europe or other neighboring countries.
There are stories of expat criminals involving themselves in catalytic converter theft in Finland, illegal tobacco in Czech Republic, and robbery in Moldova.
So during our fieldwork, we talked to a guy and he said one of his criminal friends went to Europe and borrowed 300 euros from him. And in a year, he gave them back and said he's making 300,000 euros now because he has an illegal cigarette factory in Europe.
Those who stayed faced a difficult situation. Cut off from their traditional sources of revenue, they had no option but to eat the fat, drawing on financial reserves accumulated in times of plenty. The security situation also put a dampener on criminal activity. The massive expansion of checks and patrols in the early days of the invasion, when it seemed like Odessa might soon come under attack, led to a drastic decline in street crime. What about the sex trade, for which Odessa had become notorious?
So since the war, no tourists have been arriving in Odessa, and this has led to a drop in demand of sexual services. And it was, for the sex workers in Odessa, it was much harder to operate. So what happened is that many have left the country. And what happens next then is that as a result of the war, women face economic desperation and they are forced to turn to sex work. And there is a new group, but they are not professionals. So we have heard from senior police sources that they have seen women lining between the highway between Odessa and Kiev. And also because other forms of organized crime have shrunk, human trafficking has become a very interim viable economic sector. And what we know in general is that wars and conflicts, they have long been found to drive human trafficking vulnerabilities and exploitation. So our concern is that because of the economic situation and the war, the situation of human trafficking in Odessa is going to get much worse.
What about guns? Another notorious exploit of Odessa. Even weapons trafficking, a specialty in Odessa, did not see the surge expected. But the trade remained suppressed. According to one underworld source, criminals would rather have the weapons to use against the Russians than sell them.
I think one of the main concerns for the West is the danger of weapons getting out of Ukraine from the conflict and going back to Europe. Our fieldwork has shown that this is not the case, at least at this time. The reason is that at this point, it's vital that Ukraine receives more weapons. And we have a saying in Ukraine that we water our flowers with oil, which means that the people tend to keep the weapons close by, buried underground.
And the difficulty of moving weapons and the low profit margins were also cited as reasons for lower trade. But it wasn't all bad news for organized crime in 2022. Some areas in particular grew dramatically. The first has been the smuggling of conscripts across the border with Moldova or Romania, with hundreds attempting to flee military service.
I think there are new crimes after the full-scale invasion started. For example, traffic of people or human traffic abroad, people who don't want to fight.
The second has been the rise in synthetic drugs. A steady flow of methadone is reported to be coming from the Cherkasy region to the north, and amphetamines from Dnipro. There have been cases of amphetamines being sold to military personnel, but it is the subcategory of synthetics, known as salts, that has seen the biggest increase.
The new thing on the drug market is the so-called salts, and these are very cheap. You can buy them at 5 euros a dose. And it actually helps you get off heroin, but the results you get for your health and your mental health are disastrous. Because of the war, people have gotten poorer, and so you need cheaper drugs, and salts are very cheap.
One SBU bust found alpha PVP being packed for retail in a warehouse in Odessa. The SBU traced the organizer to Russian-occupied Donetsk, and found that several members of the gang received money through cryptocurrency exchanges located in Russia. But arguably, the actor to gain the most has paradoxically been the state.
Sources in Odessa told us that you can't do anything on a more or less large scale without the law enforcement knowing about it and controlling the situation and telling you what to do. No criminal activity is possible without law enforcement.
In the city itself, the SBU has emerged as the sole authority, superseding even the police. The SBU are a unique agency combining counterintelligence and law enforcement mandates, and the war has greatly expanded their sphere of influence.
Because of martial law, the law enforcement agencies have increased their role everywhere, in Odessa in particular, because it's a port city and it's close to Russia. But the increasing power of these law enforcement agencies, especially the Secret Service, the SBU, may be a risk in the future. And the SBU is one of the agencies that has not seen any reform in Ukraine. And that's where the danger lies. Will the SBU use its new powers to do something good? Or will it use these powers to do something that would be considered not good?
This is no radical departure, but a continuation of an existing trend. The SBU and the police have long been the ultimate arbiter of criminal dynamics in Odessa, with matters discussed and settled in informal ways, sometimes even out in the open. At the center of the management of organized crime in Odessa is the book market, universally known as the book. Despite its name, there are few books on sale. Instead, many of the stalls stock foreign branded cigarettes, sweets, and detergents, much of which is contraband. This may seem strange when you consider that the headquarters of the SBU and the police are on the same street, until one understands the real purpose of the book.
The book market situated in the center of Odessa, just called The Book, is a special place. It's where everyone meets everyone to discuss issues and resolve problems. It's where the criminals and the SBU people and the prosecutors and the police meet over coffee and, kind of decide what to do with the city.
The changing political power dynamics have also brought Odessa's established powerhouses under threat. Mayor Gennady Trukhanov has been one of Odessa's most recognizable figures since he took charge at City Hall in 2014. He's maintained widespread support among Odessa residents, despite allegations of land misappropriation and embezzlement centering on the old Cryan factory and revelations stemming from the Panama Papers in 2016.
Trukhanov is a very peculiar person because he has been accused of having affiliations to the mafia. He has been proven to have several passports, and he is now facing charges and was forced to stay at home because there was a court decision for him to do so.
Another member of the Odessa hierarchy to find themselves under pressure has been Vladimir Galanternik, an Odessa-born businessman and allegedly a close associate of Trukhanov, who stands accused of running a criminal organization.
Allegedly, Galanternik is one of the big guys, one of the heavyweights in the Odessa underworld. And he has been ruling this underworld for quite some time. But now he's losing his influence. Again, allegedly.
Trukhanov and Galanternik were considered by many to form Odessa's Big Three, along with Alexander Angert, the so-called Angel of Odessa, who ran the underworld in the 1990s and early 2000s. Now with Angert sick and Trukhanov and Galanternik under intense investigation, there are signs that the old guard may be on the way out.
Our sources are telling us that the old guard is basically out, and then that the new guard, the new people on the block, don't want to be criminal. They want to be legalized businessmen. So the old Odessa, the old criminal Odessa is basically gone, a thing of the past. What about the future? What does the future hold for Odessa? I think it all depends. It all depends on the port reopening. That's number one. The second, will this big rift between the Russian and Ukrainian criminal systems persist, or will it be business as usual? And the third, will Odessa retain its role as one of the criminal centers of Eastern Europe?
As 2023 has progressed, Odessa has found itself increasingly drawn into the dynamics of the conflict. There is some agreement, though, about what will happen next. In our fieldwork for this report, all sources agreed that the return of ex-soldiers, including those who have developed substance addictions, would be the most destabilizing factor in the near future.
We've heard a lot about the concerns by a lot of people on the soldiers returning back from the front line. What will they do? How will they act? How will they react? How will they reintegrate into peaceful life? Will they maybe become part of the criminal world? And that is something we need to worry about.
I think after the war, unfortunately, the crimes will be returned to Odessa region. But I hope that Ukraine will overcome the crime and corruption after the war.
The old lines are being erased, the new ones yet to be drawn.